She left work just after 9. Security footage showed her walking alone, carrying 2 plastic bags, heading toward her dorm. The footage ends there. She was never seen alive again. Days later, hikers made a disturbing discovery deep in the forest. And what investigators found next, hidden on a memory card left inside a car, was so grotesque, it was sealed away from the public for years. Subscribe if you're drawn to stories that should have ended with justice, and comment below. Do you think evil always leaves evidence? Or are some monsters never meant to be caught? Now, let's go back to the night of October 26, 2009. And the quiet footsteps that led Miyako Hiraoka into oblivion. Hamada, Japan. Population 57,000. Sits nestled against the Sea of Japan, a picturesque coastal town where mountains meet the ocean. Tourism brochures call it serene and traditional. Local authorities call it one of the safest cities in Shirmane Prefecture. The residents used to believe that. October in Hamada brings crisp air, falling leaves, and early sunsets. By 5 p.m., shadows stretch across the narrow streets. By 7 p.m., darkness blankets the city. In this darkness, 19-year-old Miyako Hiraoka finished her shift at the Sakura Ice Cream Parlor, located just 2 miles from her university dormitory. The security camera mounted above the shop's entrance captured her departure at 9:16 p.m. The grainy footage shows a slender young woman in a striped blouse and dark jeans, her long black hair pulled into a neat ponytail. She bows slightly to her manager, adjusts the 2 plastic bags in her hands, one containing leftover ice cream given to employees, the other holding textbooks and notes, and steps into the night. 300 yen. That's what the bus fare would have cost her. 300 yen that Miyako decided to save by walking home alone. 300 yen that cost her everything. She was meticulous about saving money, recalls Harumi Tanaka, Miyako's roommate at Shirmane University. Her family wasn't wealthy. Her father worked 2 jobs to pay for her education. She didn't want to waste anything. Not food, not time, not money. She kept a small notebook where she tracked every yen she spent. Every single one. That notebook was found in her dorm room, the last entry showing a deposit of 2,700 yen into her savings account earlier that day. Money she would never get to use. The route from the ice cream parlor to Shirmane University crosses through a mixed residential and commercial district before reaching a quieter stretch of road bordered by dense forest on one side and scattered houses on the other. Streetlights here are spaced far apart, creating pools of harsh light with vast shadows between them. A second security camera, positioned outside a small electronics shop halfway along her route, captured Miyako passing at 9:28 p.m. She appears to be walking briskly, her posture slightly hunched against the autumn chill. The footage shows her passing through the frame, disappearing into darkness, never to emerge on any other camera. That 12-minute stretch of video, from the ice cream parlor to the electronics shop, constitutes the last confirmed sightings of Miyako Hiraoka alive. The timing is crucial, explains former detective Kenji Nakamura, who led the initial investigation. If she maintained her pace, she should have reached her dormitory by 9:45 p.m. at the latest. Her roommate called campus security at 11:20 p.m. when Miyako hadn't returned. By the time the report reached us at the police station, it was past midnight. Critical hours had already slipped away. In missing persons cases, these first hours often determine whether victims are found alive. The search began at dawn. Police officers, university students, and local volunteers combed the route between the ice cream parlor and the dormitory. They found nothing, no dropped belongings, no signs of struggle, no blood, no footprints leading off the path. It was as if Miyako had simply vanished mid-step. We questioned everyone, Nakamura continues, his voice tightening. Shop owners who might have seen her, residents along the route, her professors, classmates, co-workers. We built a detailed profile of her life, her habits, her relationships. She was studious, quiet, ambitious. No boyfriends, no enemies, no conflicts. She wanted to become a marine biologist. She volunteered at an elderly care facility on weekends. She called her parents every Sunday without fail. Miyako's mother, Sachiko Hiraoka, received the call about her daughter's disappearance the morning after. She and her husband arrived in Hamada by nightfall. "I knew something terrible had happened," Sachiko told a reporter years later. Miyako was responsible. She wouldn't just disappear. She wouldn't worry us like that. Something, or someone, had taken her. For 7 days, search parties expanded outward from the path Miyako should have taken. Divers checked nearby waterways. Police dogs traced and retraced routes through the forest. Helicopters scanned the mountainous terrain surrounding Hamada. Missing person flyers with Miyako's smiling face appeared on every streetlight, store window, and bulletin board in the city. 7 days of searching. 7 days of hope fading with each sunset. On the 8th day, November 3rd, a mushroom collector ventured deep into the forests of Mount Garyu, approximately 4 miles from where Miyako was last seen. Takashi Yamada, 67, was searching for Matsutake mushrooms when he made a discovery that would haunt him for the rest of his life. "I thought it was a mannequin at first," Yamada said during his police statement, his hands trembling so violently that an officer had to transcribe for him. Something about the color wasn't right. It was sitting upright against a tree, facing away from the path. I called out, thinking maybe it was a hiker resting. When there was no response, I approached and circled around to see. What Yamada saw was Miyako Hiraoka's severed head, positioned deliberately at the base of an ancient pine tree, her eyes still open, staring emptily at the forest canopy above. The forensic team arrived within the hour. The area was cordoned off, and an extensive grid search of the surrounding forest began. Over the next 3 days, investigators found additional remains scattered in a methodical pattern spanning nearly half a mile, a torso with the chest cavity opened and emptied of organs approximately 400 meters from the head, a left leg 200 meters beyond that, a right arm positioned near a small stream, and other body parts distributed with what investigators described as horrifying deliberation. "This wasn't rage," explains forensic psychologist Dr. Yumi Watanabe, who consulted on the case. "Rage is chaotic, disorganized. This was ritual. This was performance. The killer took time, days, most likely, to complete this. The body had been drained of blood elsewhere, dismembered with surgical precision, and then arranged in the forest according to some twisted design that made sense only to the perpetrator. The autopsy revealed details too gruesome for public disclosure. Reports confirmed Miyako had been alive during the initial stages of her torture. Her internal organs had been carefully removed and were never found. The lack of blood at the scene indicated she had been killed and dismembered elsewhere before her remains were transported to Mount Garyu. News of the discovery spread through Hamada like a virus. Schools closed. Businesses shut early. The streets emptied after sunset. Parents kept children indoors. University students traveled in groups, even during daylight. A city that had once prided itself on safety now locked its doors, installed security systems, and eyed strangers with suspicion. The investigation expanded dramatically. Every registered sex offender in Shirmaine Prefecture was interviewed. Traffic camera footage was analyzed for vehicles traveling between Hamada and Mount Garyu on the nights following Miyako's disappearance. DNA samples were collected from dozens of men who lived or worked along Miyako's route home. Yet despite the extensive investigation, no arrests were made. Leads grew cold. Witnesses came forward with contradictory information. A taxi driver reported seeing a young woman matching Miyako's description getting into a dark sedan around 9:40 p.m., but couldn't identify the vehicle's make or license plate. A convenience store clerk thought he saw Miyako buying bottled water at 10:15 p.m., but security footage showed it was a different student with similar features. As weeks turned to months, the case that had consumed Hamada began to fade from daily conversation. Police officers were reassigned. The media moved on to other stories. Miyako's parents returned to their home, carrying an emptiness no parent should ever know. The hardest part, Sachiko Hiraoka would later say, was knowing she suffered. That she was afraid. That she was alone. That we couldn't protect her. That we will never know why. For 4 years, the case of Miyako Hiraoka remained open but inactive, a thick file in a cabinet labeled unsolved, gathering dust alongside other mysteries that haunt the halls of justice. But evil leaves traces. Even the most careful monsters make mistakes. And sometimes, years later, darkness finds a way to speak. The truth was waiting to be discovered, hidden inside a vehicle abandoned on the outskirts of Hamada, a digital record of horror that would finally put a face to the monster who stole Miyako from the world. But that revelation would have to wait until 2016, when a routine inventory of impounded vehicles would uncover evidence so disturbing that many investigators requested transfers after viewing it. Hamada continued its uneasy existence, trying to forget what happened in their forest. The residents avoided Mount Garyu, especially after dark, when some claimed to hear a young woman's voice asking the same question over and over, "Why me?" A question that, for years, had no answer. November in Hamada brought relentless rain. The forest floor turned to mud, hampering search efforts and washing away potential evidence. Despite this, forensic teams methodically documented each discovery, attempting to reconstruct not just where Miyako's remains were found, but what story they told about her killer. The pattern was unlike anything I'd encountered in 23 years of police work, recalls Chief Medical Examiner Dr. Takashi Morita. Most dismemberment cases involve hasty disposal, with parts bundled together or discarded randomly. This was different. Precise. Almost curated. The scattered remains created a macabre constellation across the eastern slope of Mount Garyu. When mapped, they formed an irregular spiral, with Miyako's head at the center and other body parts radiating outward at increasing distances. The placement required intimate knowledge of the mountain's terrain, its hidden clearings, animal paths, and seasonal water sources. The forensic examination revealed details so disturbing that many were redacted from official reports. What can be shared is this: Miyako had been kept alive for approximately 36 to 48 hours after her abduction. Evidence of controlled blood loss, systematic torture, and surgical precision suggested her killer possessed medical knowledge. The complete absence of defensive wounds indicated she had been restrained throughout her ordeal. The mutilation wasn't frenzied, Dr. Morita explains, choosing his words carefully. Each incision was deliberate, with minimal tissue damage around cut sites. The dismemberment occurred post-mortem, but the other procedures, those were conducted while the victim was conscious. These other procedures included the methodical removal of organs. Miyako's heart, lungs, liver, kidneys, and reproductive organs were never recovered. The cavity of her torso had been cleaned with a chemical solution that destroyed most DNA evidence. Her eyes had been removed with surgical precision. Even her fingernails and several teeth had been extracted, common sources of DNA and evidence of struggle. This wasn't just murder, states criminal psychologist Dr. Yumi Watanabe. This was transformation. The killer was converting a human being into a series of objects, specimens to be preserved and displayed. It speaks to a level of dehumanization rarely seen even in serial offender cases. The autopsy revealed another chilling detail. Miyako's blood had been drained almost completely, yet very little blood was found at any of the recovery sites. This indicated a primary crime scene, a controlled environment where the killer had performed the most intensive procedures before transporting the remains to the mountain. We're looking for a location with drainage, privacy, and enough space to perform complex procedures, Detective Nakamura told his team during a briefing on November 7. Possibly a basement, garage, or outbuilding. Somewhere the perpetrator could work without interruption for extended periods. The search for this primary crime scene became a priority. Police compiled a list of properties within a 20-kilometer radius of Miyako's last known location. They focused on isolated structures, buildings with recent renovations involving plumbing, and properties owned by individuals with medical or butchery training. Meanwhile, the evidence collected from Mount Garyu offered few traditional forensic leads. Tire tracks near a forest access road had been obliterated by rain. Footprints around the disposal sites showed only generic work boot patterns available from dozens of retailers throughout Japan. Fiber evidence was contaminated by exposure to the elements. The killer had been methodical in eliminating physical evidence. It was as if we were hunting a ghost, says former officer Ran Taniguchi, who participated in the evidence collection. Every potential lead dissolved under scrutiny. No fingerprints. No hairs. No fluids. Nothing but Miyako's remains, positioned like pieces in a game we couldn't understand. The community response to these revelations was immediate and overwhelming. Parents withdrew children from after-school activities. The university implemented a mandatory buddy system for students traveling after dark. Local businesses donated funds for additional security cameras throughout the city. Volunteer patrols formed to monitor neighborhoods. But beneath the practical responses lurked a deeper, more primal fear. The killer was likely someone within their community. Someone who shopped at their stores, walked their streets, perhaps even participated in the search parties. After certain details leaked to the public, people began to look at their neighbors differently, explained sociologist Dr. Hana Yoshida, who studied the community impact of the case. The precision of the crime suggested someone with specialized knowledge. Suddenly, the local doctor, the butcher, the biology teacher, anyone with relevant skills became suspect in the public imagination. This suspicion extended to Miyako's immediate circle. Her co-workers at the ice cream parlor were interrogated repeatedly. Her professors were asked to account for their movements on the night of her disappearance. Even her few close friends endured scrutiny that left lasting psychological damage. Harumi Tanaka, Miyako's roommate, suffered a nervous breakdown after her third police interview. They kept asking about Miyako's relationships, she later revealed. Did she have a boyfriend? Was she seeing a professor? Did she mention any stalkers? The same questions over and over until I began doubting my own memories. The investigation expanded to include sex offenders throughout the region. 37 individuals with histories of violent crime were questioned, their properties searched. None yielded connections to Miyako or evidence of involvement in her murder. As detectives worked to understand the killer's methodology, they consulted with international experts on similar cases. The FBI's Behavioral Analysis Unit provided a preliminary profile. A male between 30 to 45 years old, methodical, intelligent, with some formal medical training or self-taught anatomical knowledge. Someone capable of maintaining a normal social facade while harboring extreme sadistic tendencies. Someone patient enough to plan every detail, yet compelled by urges powerful enough to drive him to such elaborate extremes. The level of organization suggests this wasn't his first violent act, the FBI report stated. However, the ritualistic elements may be escalations from previous, less elaborate crimes. We recommend reviewing unsolved disappearances or animal mutilations within a 100-kilometer radius over the past decade. This recommendation led to the discovery of 3 unsolved cases with troubling similarities. In 2005, a 22-year-old female tourist disappeared from a hiking trail near Mount Garyu. Only her backpack was recovered, containing all her identification and valuables. In 2007, a university student reported being followed by a dark sedan while walking home from a library at night. The vehicle's driver allegedly offered her a ride, became insistent, then fled when another car approached. In 2008, a local farmer discovered several livestock animals mutilated in a manner described as surgical and organized. The case was dismissed as predator activity, despite the farmer's insistence that no natural predator could have caused such precise wounds. None of these cases had been connected until investigators began searching specifically for precursor events. Even with these potential links, they lacked sufficient evidence to identify a suspect. The most promising lead came from an unlikely source, the memory card in Miyako's digital camera, found in her dormitory. The last photos showed her at work, smiling with co-workers. Metadata indicated these were taken just hours before her disappearance. But forensic analysis of the card revealed something else: deleted photos that had been taken after the timestamp of her disappearance. Someone had used Miyako's camera after she vanished, then deleted the images. Digital recovery specialists worked to retrieve these deleted files. The process was painstaking, with the team extracting fragmented data bit by bit. After 3 weeks, they recovered partial images, too corrupted to provide clear visuals, but distinct enough to confirm they were not taken by Miyako. The recovered fragments showed dark interior spaces, indistinct blurred forms, and what appeared to be reflective surfaces. The timestamp placed these photos between 11:30 p.m. on October 26 and 2:15 a.m. on October 27, the critical hours after Miyako's disappearance. These corrupted images told us something crucial, explains digital forensics expert Yoko Saito. The killer took her camera. Perhaps as a trophy, perhaps to document his work. Either way, it suggested a personal connection. He wanted not just to take her life, but to possess objects connected to her identity. This psychological insight shifted the investigation toward individuals who might have had brief but meaningful interactions with Miyako, someone who formed a fixation after a casual encounter. Investigators re-interviewed everyone from bus drivers on her regular routes to clerks at shops she frequented. Meanwhile, The physical evidence continued to present contradictions. The precision of the mutilations indicated medical knowledge, yet the transportation and disposal of remains suggested familiarity with the outdoor environment. The killer seemed methodical enough to eliminate traditional evidence, yet impulsive enough to take unnecessary risks by arranging the remains in a pattern. He was both calculating and performative, pragmatic and theatrical. "We're looking for someone living a double life," Detective Nakamura concluded in a December briefing. "Someone with compartmentalized personalities, capable of functioning normally in society while harboring extreme deviance. This level of psychological fracturing typically manifests in behavioral inconsistencies visible to close associates." As the investigation approached its second month, public attention began to wane. Media coverage decreased. The initial shock gave way to uneasy acceptance. Hamada residents established a new normal, defined by increased security measures and lingering fear. For the Hiraoka family, there was no new normal. Only endless grief interrupted by moments of hope when investigators called with questions that ultimately led nowhere. They established a modest memorial scholarship in Miyako's name at Shermaine University. They kept her room untouched. They waited for justice that seemed increasingly unlikely. By January 2010, the active investigation transitioned to cold case status. The evidence was preserved, the files maintained, but no new resources were allocated. Detective Nakamura was reassigned to other cases, though he continued to review Miyako's file during personal time. Mount Garyu, once popular with hikers and nature enthusiasts, became a place locals avoided. The discovery sites, though unmarked on official maps, became known through whispered conversations. Parents warned children to stay away. Stories began to circulate about strange sounds in the forest, a young woman's voice asking questions that echo without answers. The physical remains of Miyako Hiraoka were eventually released to her family for cremation. But the case remained open, the questions unanswered, the killer potentially still walking the streets of Hamada. For 7 years, silence prevailed. The case file gathered dust. Witnesses moved away. Officers retired. The community's collective memory began to fade. Then in 2016, a routine inventory of impounded vehicles revealed something that would break the silence, and expose the face of a monster who had hidden in plain sight all along. The Miyako Hiraoka investigation officially became a cold case on January 17, 2010, when the Shermaine Prefecture Police Department reassigned the last dedicated detective to other duties. The decision wasn't announced publicly, no press conference, no formal statement, just a bureaucratic notation in a file and the quiet clearing of a bulletin board that had once held maps, timelines, and photographs documenting every aspect of the young woman's disappearance and murder. Detective Kenji Nakamura stood alone in the now-empty conference room, staring at the blank wall where Miyako's smiling university ID photo had been pinned for 83 days. "I'm sorry," he whispered to the empty space. "I'm sorry we failed you." Cold cases are never truly forgotten, especially in small communities like Hamada where violent crime is rare. But without new evidence, even the most disturbing cases gradually recede from daily conversation, replaced by the mundane concerns of ordinary life. Streets that emptied at sunset slowly filled again with evening shoppers. University students cautiously resumed walking alone. The news cycle moved on to other tragedies. Yet beneath this veneer of normalcy, Hamada had fundamentally changed. "It's difficult to articulate the transformation," explained sociologist Dr. Hana Yoshida. Before Miyako, Hamada residents left doors unlocked. Children played unsupervised until dinner. There was an implicit trust in the community. After Miyako, that innocence vanished. Security system sales increased 340% in the 6 months following her murder. Neighborhood watch programs formed in every district. The community sealed itself, becoming more vigilant but also more isolated. This vigilance occasionally flared into panic. In April 2010, police received 17 separate reports about a white van parked near Shermaine University. The driver, a delivery man on his lunch break, was detained for questioning before being released. In July, a medical student practicing sutures on a chicken carcass in his apartment prompted a neighbor to call authorities. By December, false alarms had become so common that the police department issued public guidelines for distinguishing between suspicious activity and ordinary behavior. For Miyako's parents, The transition to cold case status was devastating. Sachiko and Hiroshi Hiroka had relocated temporarily to Hamada during the active investigation, renting a small apartment near the police station. When informed that dedicated resources were being redirected, they packed their meager belongings and returned to their home in Kyoto. "We left part of ourselves in Hamada," Sachiko later told a journalist. "Not just our daughter's memory, but our faith in justice, our belief in a world that makes sense. We go through the motions of living, but we died with Miyako." The Hiroka family established a modest foundation offering self-defense classes for young women. They funded additional security cameras along the route their daughter had walked. Each October, they returned to Hamada to place flowers at the last location where Miyako was captured on surveillance footage. Small rituals of remembrance in a world that was forgetting. Detective Nakamura, though officially reassigned, couldn't let go. He converted his apartment's spare bedroom into an unofficial incident room, duplicating case files and evidence photographs at his own expense. Weekends and evenings were devoted to reviewing statements, reconstructing timelines, searching for the overlooked detail that might break the case open. "My wife left after the second year," Nakamura admits. "She said she was married to a ghost, not Miyako's ghost, but the ghost I had become. She wasn't wrong. I ceased to exist outside that case. It consumed me." Nakamura's obsession wasn't unique. Throughout law enforcement, certain cases become personal. The ones that defy solution, that haunt dreams, that challenge an officer's fundamental belief in their ability to deliver justice. For many in the Hamada Police Department, Miyako's case represented their greatest professional failure. The years following the transition to cold case saw occasional resurgences of public interest. On the first anniversary of Miyako's disappearance, a local newspaper published a retrospective, interviewing investigators and witnesses. For a week, the case dominated conversation again. Theories were revisited. Tips flowed into the police station, most recycled from the original investigation, none offering new insights. On the second anniversary, a true crime podcast produced a 3-part series on the case. The hosts, based in Tokyo, traveled to Hamada, retraced Miyako's last known route, and interviewed peripheral figures including her former co-workers and classmates. The podcast reached a wider audience than local media had, drawing attention from throughout Japan and internationally. This increased exposure generated both benefits and complications. Anonymous users on internet forums began amateur investigations, sometimes identifying innocent individuals as suspects based on flimsy circumstantial evidence. The police department had to issue formal statements debunking several such accusations. Meanwhile, legitimate tips emerged from unexpected sources. A truck driver who regularly traveled between Hamada and neighboring cities reported seeing a dark sedan parked along a forest access road near Mount Garyu in the early morning hours after Miyako's disappearance. He hadn't come forward initially, assuming the detail was irrelevant. "I saw the car around 4:30 a.m., his statement read. "It struck me as unusual because that road serves no residential areas, and it was still dark. The vehicle's interior light was on. I glimpsed someone inside, but couldn't make out details. I was running behind schedule and didn't stop." This information, while potentially valuable, came too late to be actionable. Traffic camera footage that might have identified the vehicle had been overwritten months earlier. The witness couldn't recall specific details about the car's make or model beyond dark-colored and sedan style. By the third anniversary, public commemorations had dwindled to a small gathering of Miyako's former classmates and the Hiroka family. Local media coverage was reduced to brief mentions. The case that had once consumed an entire community was fading into historical reference, a tragedy remembered primarily as a cautionary tale parents told adolescent children about the dangers of walking alone at night. In police circles, however, the case maintained its legendary status. New recruits to the Hamada department were familiar with the details before their first day. The unsolved murder became a benchmark against which other investigations were measured. Veterans spoke of pre-Miyako and post-Miyako eras in the department's history, referring to changes in protocol and resource allocation that resulted from lessons learned during the failed investigation. "We implemented mandatory psychology consultations after the Miyako case," explains former police chief Toshiro Yamamoto. "Several officers developed significant trauma from working with the evidence, particularly the photographs. 2 requested transfers to administrative positions. One resigned from law enforcement entirely. We realized we hadn't prepared our personnel for cases of this nature. The psychological impact extended beyond law enforcement to others connected to the investigation. Dr. Takashi Morita, the chief medical examiner who performed the autopsy, took early retirement in 2012, citing persistent insomnia and intrusive thoughts related to the case. Takashi Yamada, the mushroom collector who discovered Miyako's severed head, sold his home in Hamada and relocated to Hokkaido, reportedly telling neighbors he couldn't bear to look at the mountains anymore. As cold cases age, they typically follow one of three trajectories. They're solved through new evidence or technology, they're officially closed due to the death of primary suspects, or they transition from active investigations to historical mysteries, preserved in archives and memories but unlikely to see resolution. The Miyako Hiraoka case appeared destined for the third category until 2014, when a promising development briefly reignited hope. Advances in DNA technology allowed for more sensitive analysis of biological evidence. The Shermaine Prefecture Police Department, participating in a national cold case initiative, submitted samples from 20 unsolved cases for re-examination using these enhanced techniques. Among them were trace evidence samples from Miyako's case, minuscule blood spatter found on a leaf near one of the disposal sites, previously too degraded for conclusive testing. The new analysis identified the blood as belonging to an unknown male, confirming what investigators had long suspected. At least some of the blood at the scene had come from the killer, not the victim. This represented the first concrete biological evidence linking an unidentified subject to the crime. The DNA profile was entered into the national database but returned no matches. While disappointing, this wasn't surprising. Japan's DNA database was relatively limited compared to those in other developed nations, containing profiles primarily from individuals previously convicted of specific categories of crimes. Nevertheless, the confirmation of suspect DNA fundamentally changed the case's outlook. If the perpetrator was ever identified and apprehended for another offense, or if familial DNA searching became permitted under Japanese law, a match could potentially be made. This is why we never truly close cases like Miyako's, explains forensic scientist Dr. Akiko Nakano. Evidence preserved today may speak tomorrow through technologies we haven't yet developed. The passage of time sometimes works in favor of justice, rather than against it. In 2015, Detective Nakamura retired from the police force after 27 years of service. His retirement speech mentioned Miyako by name, promising that he would continue to advocate for resources to be allocated to her case and others like it. True to his word, he established a volunteer cold case review group consisting of retired law enforcement professionals. They met monthly in a community center conference room, methodically re-examining unsolved crimes throughout the prefecture. It was during one of these review sessions in early 2016 that Nakamura received a call from his former partner, still active in the department. The call concerned a seemingly unrelated matter. A routine inventory of vehicles in the police impound lot had identified a discrepancy. A dark blue Toyota sedan had been held in evidence storage since November 2009, connected to a fatal single-vehicle accident that occurred 3 days after Miyako's estimated time of death. The driver, 38-year-old Yoshihara Yano, and his elderly mother had been killed when their vehicle veered off a coastal road and plunged into the Sea of Japan. At the time, the crash was classified as an accident, possibly caused by driver fatigue or medical emergency. The vehicle had been impounded for standard investigation, then apparently forgotten in administrative confusion during department restructuring. The inventory clerk had flagged the vehicle for disposal when he noticed something unusual in the case notes. The accident had occurred along a route that would logically be taken when traveling from Mount Garyu back towards central Hamada. This geographical connection, while circumstantial, was enough to prompt a re-examination of the vehicle before its scheduled destruction. Nakamura, despite his retired status, was invited to observe due to his extensive knowledge of the Miyako case. The Toyota had spent nearly 7 years in the climate-controlled evidence garage, preserved in the condition it had been recovered from the accident site. The exterior showed impact damage consistent with the crash report. The interior appeared unremarkable at first glance, standard upholstery, personal items scattered by the collision, nothing overtly suspicious. It was the decision to check the vehicle's electronic systems that changed everything. Modern vehicles contain numerous digital storage components, navigation systems that record destinations, entertainment systems that store media, onboard computers that log operational data. This Toyota, while not the newest model in 2009, had a basic navigation system and a digital camera connection port in the center console. When technicians extracted the navigation system's memory, they discovered that all location data had been systematically erased, a process requiring deliberate action beyond normal use. This in itself was suspicious, suggesting the vehicle's owner had intentionally removed potentially incriminating location information. But it was a memory card found lodged beneath the passenger seat that would ultimately break the case wide open. The 2 GB SD card, standard for digital cameras of that era, had been physically damaged in the crash but remained potentially readable with specialized equipment. Digital forensics experts working carefully over several days managed to recover fragments of data from the damaged card. What they found sent shockwaves through the department and would finally put a name and face to the monster who had haunted Hamada for 7 years. The memory card contained 57 photographs, each more disturbing than the last. They documented Miyako Hiraoka's final hours in graphic, methodical detail. And the metadata embedded in these digital files would provide investigators with the evidence they had sought for years: timestamps, location data, and the digital fingerprint of the camera that had recorded a young woman's systematic torture and dismemberment. After 7 years of silence, Miyako was finally speaking. And what she revealed would force Hamada to confront a horror far more intimate than anyone had imagined. The killer hadn't been a shadowy outsider but someone known to the community, someone who had been hiding in plain sight all along. The recovery of the memory card from Yoshihara Yano's vehicle marked a turning point in the Miyako Hiraoka investigation. For 7 years, police had pursued shadows, theoretical profiles, incomplete evidence, and fragmented witness accounts. Now they had concrete digital evidence linking a specific individual to one of Japan's most disturbing unsolved murders. Digital forensics expert Mei Tanaka led the team tasked with extracting data from the damaged SD card. The card had suffered physical trauma during the accident, Tanaka explains. Several connection pins were bent, and there was moisture damage to the circuit board. In 2009, this might have been deemed unrecoverable, but advances in recovery techniques made it possible to access approximately 83% of the stored data. What they recovered were 57 photographs documenting Miyako's captivity, torture, and death. The images were methodically organized, time-stamped, and shot with deliberate composition. Not the frantic documentation of an impulsive killer, but the careful work of someone recording a process they wanted to preserve and revisit. The first images showed Miyako bound to a metal table in what appeared to be a basement or workshop. The concrete walls were bare except for carefully arranged tools. Lighting was provided by medical-grade lamps positioned to eliminate shadows. The setting suggested extensive preparation. This space had been designed specifically for its horrific purpose. The environment reveals premeditation, explains forensic psychologist Dr. Yumi Watanabe. This wasn't an opportunistic crime where a perpetrator improvised with available resources. The space was equipped with drainage systems, restraints bolted to concrete, specialized lighting. Creating such an environment requires time, resources, and privacy, all indicators of a highly organized offender. The timestamps on the photos established a timeline that aligned with the original investigation's estimates. Miyako was abducted around 9:35 p.m. on October 26. The first photographs were taken at 11:42 p.m. that same night. The final image was timestamped 3:17 p.m. on October 28, approximately 41 hours of captivity before her death. Most disturbing was the progression visible across the image sequence. Early photographs showed Miyako conscious and terrified. Later images documented systematic mutilation, with the killer appearing to follow a predetermined sequence. The final photographs showed the dismemberment and preparation of remains for disposal, clinical, methodical work performed with surgical precision. 3 of the images inadvertently captured reflections of the photographer in polished metal surfaces. Though partially distorted, these reflections provided confirmation of what the evidence already suggested. Yoshihara Yano, the man who died in the car accident 3 days after Miyako's murder, was her killer. The reflection analysis was conclusive, states facial recognition specialist Hiroto Sato. Despite distortion, we identified 15 distinct facial reference points matching Yano's driver's license photograph. The statistical probability of misidentification is less than 1 in 4 million. Yano's background offered few obvious indicators of violent tendencies. Born in 1971 in northern Shirmane Prefecture, he had served 4 years in the Japanese Self-Defense Forces before receiving an honorable discharge. He worked primarily as an equipment maintenance technician at various industrial facilities, including a 6-month contract at Sherman University that ended approximately 1 year before Miyako's murder. His criminal record contained only minor infractions, a traffic violation in 2003 and a public intoxication incident in 2006. However, deeper investigation revealed concerning patterns beneath this unremarkable surface. Former colleagues described Yano as meticulously organized, but socially awkward. He lived with his elderly mother in a modest house on Hamada's outskirts. The property included a detached workshop where Yano reportedly spent most evenings and weekends. Neighbors recalled hearing power tools operating late into the night but thought nothing of it. Yano was known to restore antique furniture as a hobby. "We're examining whether this workshop was the primary crime scene," Detective Superintendent Masaki Ito stated during a press briefing. The property has changed ownership twice since 2009. Current residents are cooperating fully with our investigation, allowing structural examination including concrete core sampling and drainage system analysis. As investigators reconstructed Yano's life, a more complex picture emerged. His military service included medical technician training. His maintenance work frequently involved precision cutting tools and hydraulic systems. He possessed both the technical skills and anatomical knowledge consistent with the crime's execution. More troubling were discoveries about his online activities. Analysis of a laptop recovered from Yano's residence after the accident revealed extensive browsing of websites containing extreme content, though this aspect was initially overlooked as investigators focused on the accident circumstances rather than potential connections to Miyako's case. The laptop contained evidence of research into human anatomy, chemical preservation methods, and medieval torture techniques, explains digital investigator Shota Nakamura. The browsing history showed increasingly specific searches in the months preceding Miyako's abduction, suggesting escalation in both fantasy and planning. Perhaps most chilling was the discovery of surveillance photos on the same memory card. These images, taken weeks before the abduction, showed Miyako walking to classes, working at the ice cream parlor, and studying in the university library. Yano had been stalking her, learning her routines, and planning his attack well in advance. One surveillance photo showed Miyako serving ice cream to a customer. The timestamp placed this interaction 10 days before her abduction. The customer, visible only from behind, wore a maintenance uniform consistent with those used by university contractors. This suggested Yano may have deliberately initiated contact with Miyako while maintaining his anonymity. The connection to Sherman University proved crucial. Records confirmed Yano had performed maintenance on refrigeration systems in several campus buildings during his employment there. Though his contract ended before Miyako enrolled, he would have gained familiarity with the campus layout, security protocols, and service entrances, knowledge that could facilitate stalking. "We believe Yano first encountered Miyako during one of his post-employment visits to campus," explains Detective Ito. Former colleagues reported he occasionally returned to socialize with maintenance staff. During one such visit, he may have seen Miyako and developed a fixation. The accident that claimed Yano's life now demanded re-examination. The single-vehicle crash occurred on October 31, 2009, 3 days after Miyako's estimated time of death and 4 days before her remains were discovered. The vehicle left the coastal road at a point with no barriers, plunging 40 meters into the Sea of Japan. Both Yano and his 76-year-old mother died on impact. Originally classified as an accident, investigators now considered other possibilities. The absence of skid marks suggested Yano never attempted to brake. Mechanical inspection had found no vehicle malfunctions. Autopsy results showed no evidence of intoxication or medical emergency. "We're exploring 3 scenarios," explains accident reconstruction specialist Takashi Kimura. First, genuine accident due to fatigue or distraction. Second, intentional suicide possibly motivated by guilt or fear of discovery. Third, what appears to be an accident but was actually a deliberate act, Yano ensuring his mother wouldn't live to learn what he had done. The inclusion of his mother as a victim complicated the psychological profile. Was her death collateral damage in a suicide, or was it a final act of control by a man whose crimes demonstrated extreme need for dominance? The answer would likely never be known with certainty. What became increasingly clear, however, was that Hamada had narrowly escaped a potential serial killer. Evidence suggested Miyako wasn't intended to be Yano's only victim. The workshop was equipped for repeated use, and the methodical documentation implied he expected to review these images while planning future crimes. The level of organization, the obvious escalation pattern in his online activities, and the elaborate recording of the crime all point to someone who intended to continue, says Dr. Watanabe. Had the accident not occurred, it's highly probable Yano would have selected another victim after a cooling-off period. This realization sent ripples through the community. For 7 years, residents had feared an unknown monster still walking among them. The confirmation that the perpetrator had died days after the crime brought complex emotions, relief mixed with frustration that Yano had escaped justice, that the Hiraoka family would never see their daughter's killer stand trial. For Detective Nakamura, the resolution brought conflicting feelings. There's professional satisfaction in solving the case, he admits. But it's hollow. Yano's death means no confession, no explanation, no opportunity for the Hayakaz to confront their daughter's killer. And the manner of his death, taking his mother with him, possibly intentionally, adds another layer of tragedy. The Hiraoka family received the news privately before public announcement. Their response, conveyed through their attorney, was brief: "We are grateful to know who took our daughter from us. This knowledge doesn't lessen our loss but allows us to direct our anger toward something concrete rather than shadows. We hope Miyako can rest more peacefully now that the truth is known." On February 18, 2016, the Shermaine Prefecture Police Department held a press conference announcing the case's resolution. The presentation was clinical and restrained, focusing on investigative procedures rather than graphic details. Officials confirmed Yoshihara Yano as Miyako's killer, supported by conclusive photographic evidence, without elaborating on the disturbing nature of the images. Media coverage was extensive but similarly restrained. Major outlets reported the resolution while respecting the Hiraoka family's privacy and the disturbing nature of the evidence. Headlines focused on the technological advances that had solved the cold case rather than sensationalizing the crime itself. The workshop on Yano's former property was demolished in March 2016, the concrete foundation removed and the ground purified in a Shinto ceremony attended by community members. A small garden was planted in its place, a gesture of reclamation and healing. Miyako's case file was officially closed on April 7, 2016, though copies remain accessible for academic research and law enforcement training. The photographs recovered from the memory card were sealed under court order, accessible only to senior law enforcement officials with specific authorization. For Hamada, the case's resolution brought closure but also complicated reflection. The community had spent years fearing an unknown outsider, yet the perpetrator was someone who had lived among them, a reminder that the most dangerous monsters often wear unremarkable disguises. The memory card that broke the case now rests in an evidence storage facility in Tokyo, preserved as both juridical record and cautionary artifact. The images it contains will never be publicly released, but their existence serves as testament to both human depravity and the enduring pursuit of justice, however delayed, however imperfect. Mount Garyu rises 912 meters above Hamada, its densely forested slopes visible from nearly everywhere in the city. Before 2009, locals viewed the mountain with affection, a place for hiking, mushroom gathering, and autumn color viewing. After Miyako Hiraoka's remains were found scattered across its eastern face, the mountain's presence transformed. It became a looming reminder, a geographical monument to tragedy. "I can't look at it without thinking of her," admits Keiko Watanabe, a longtime Hamada resident whose kitchen window frames the mountain. "Especially in the evening, when the sun sets behind it and the shadow stretches over the city. Sometimes I close my curtains early." The formal resolution of Miyako's case in 2016 brought legal closure but left cultural and psychological impacts that continue to reverberate through Hamada. With Yoshihara Yano identified as the perpetrator and confirmed deceased, the community faced the complex process of reconciling with a tragedy whose author could never be brought to justice. For the Hiraoka family, the identification of their daughter's killer provided answers but no catharsis. "We wanted to ask him why," Sachiko Hiraoka told a reporter a year after the case closed. "Not because any answer would make sense, but because 7 years of wondering created a void that facts alone cannot fill. We know who and how, but never why." The question of motive remains central. Forensic psychologists analyzing evidence suggest Yano's actions displayed elements of both organized sadism and ritualistic behavior. The meticulous documentation, the specific arrangement of remains on Mount Garyu, and the systematic nature of the mutilations all point to elaborate fantasy fulfillment rather than impulsive violence. Cases of this nature typically involve years of escalating fantasy before culminating in physical action, explains criminal psychologist Dr. Yumi Watanabe. The evidence suggests Yano crossed this threshold with Miyako, but the underlying psychological deterioration would have begun much earlier. His military medical training may have initially channeled these impulses into sanctioned contexts before they eventually overwhelmed conventional boundaries. Investigation into Yano's background revealed few obvious warning signs: no documented history of animal cruelty, no juvenile offenses, no complaints from former romantic partners. Former co-workers described him as intensely private and awkward in social situations, but never threatening. His only documented aggression was a bar altercation in 2006 that resulted in a minor public disturbance charge. This apparent normalcy in daily life contrasted sharply with the extreme violence demonstrated in Miyako's murder. The disconnect exemplifies what criminologists call compartmentalization, the psychological mechanism that allows violent offenders to maintain ordinary social functioning while harboring extreme deviance. The truly dangerous predator isn't the social outcast, notes Dr. Watanabe. It's the individual capable of presenting a conventional facade while concealing profound pathology. Yano's ability to maintain employment, care for his elderly mother, and function within community contexts while planning and executing such extreme violence represents the most concerning category of offender. This insight has influenced law enforcement training throughout Shirmaine Prefecture. The Miyako case is now featured in seminars on offender psychology, with particular emphasis on identifying subtle indicators that might distinguish potential threats from mere eccentricity. Beyond professional contexts, the case's resolution altered Hamada's relationship with its own history. For 7 years, the unsolved murder created an atmosphere of ambient fear, the sense that a killer remained at large. Learning that Yano had died days after the crime eliminated this specific threat but introduced a different discomfort, the knowledge that such extraordinary violence had gone undetected among them. There's something uniquely disturbing about realizing your neighbor, coworker, or the person behind you in line might harbor secret horrors, explains sociologist Dr. Hana Yoshida. It challenges our fundamental assumptions about our ability to assess danger and protect ourselves. This discomfort manifests in ongoing behavioral changes throughout the community. Security camera installations remain well above national averages. Enrollment in self-defense classes continues to increase annually. Parents still commonly track their children's movements via smartphone applications. The buddy system implemented at Shirmaine University after Miyako's murder remains an unofficial practice among students, particularly women. While most of Hamada has adapted to this new normal, Mount Garyu itself has developed a more complex cultural significance. The specific locations where Miyako's remains were discovered have never been marked or memorialized, a deliberate decision by authorities to prevent macabre tourism. Yet locals know approximately where these sites are, information passed through informal community knowledge. These unmarked locations have become the focus of persistent rumors about supernatural occurrences. Reports of unusual sounds, unexplained temperature drops, and electronic equipment malfunctions in these areas have circulated since 2010. Most commonly reported is the sensation of being watched while hiking alone, particularly along the eastern trails where Miyako's remains were found. Folklorist Takashi Yamamoto has documented over 60 distinct accounts of unusual experiences on Mount Garyu since 2009. Many follow similar patterns, he explains. Hikers report hearing a female voice asking questions, "Why me?" or "Can you see me?" when no one else is present. Others describe sudden emotional distress without obvious cause, overwhelming sadness or fear that subsides upon leaving the area. These reports increased significantly following media coverage of the case's resolution in 2016. As details about Miyako's ordeal became public knowledge, the stories evolved to incorporate specific elements from the case. Hikers claimed to find small arrangements of stones similar to the pattern in which her remains were discovered. Others reported brief glimpses of a young woman in a striped blouse, the clothing Miyako wore when she disappeared. Local authorities attribute these experiences to psychological suggestion and the power of collective grief. When a community experiences trauma of this magnitude, it's natural for that trauma to find expression through cultural narratives, explains Dr. Yoshida. The reports represent a community processing complex emotions through frameworks that make the incomprehensible somewhat manageable. Whether psychological or supernatural, these experiences have transformed Mount Garyu into what anthropologists call a liminal space, a location perceived to exist at the boundary between ordinary reality and something beyond normal experience. This perception influences how the mountain is used and discussed. School hiking trips now avoid certain areas. Local tour guides include warnings about sensitive locations in their orientation speeches. Buddhist priests from nearby temples occasionally perform purification rituals at the mountain's base. These practices aren't officially sanctioned but have become community traditions, ways of acknowledging the mountain's complex history while allowing continued use of its resources. For those directly connected to the case, the mountain holds more personal significance. Detective Nakamura visits annually on the anniversary of the case's resolution, hiking to a viewpoint overlooking the area where the first remains were discovered. "I don't go to the exact locations," he explains. "That would feel intrusive. But I come to acknowledge what happened here and to remind myself why this work matters." The Hiraoka family chose not to establish a physical memorial on the mountain, instead creating a scholarship fund at Shermaine University for women studying life sciences, the field Miyako had planned to enter. The scholarship requirements include completion of a self-defense course and participation in campus safety initiatives, transforming tragedy into practical protection for future students. Digital memorialization has proven more complex. The discovery of Yano's photographic record of the crime created unprecedented ethical and legal challenges. While these images provided crucial evidence, they also represented the ultimate violation of Miyako's dignity and her family's privacy. The Shermaine Prefecture Police Department established strict protocols governing these materials. The original memory card and all copies are secured in evidence storage with access limited to senior officials with specific authorization. The images cannot be used in training without extensive redaction and explicit departmental approval. Publication or reproduction in any form is prohibited under multiple statutes. These measures reflect emerging best practices for handling digital evidence in particularly sensitive cases, protocols now referenced in police departments throughout Japan. The Miyako case has become a benchmark for balancing investigative needs against victim dignity in the digital age. For current students at Shermaine University, Miyako exists primarily as institutional memory, a name mentioned during safety orientations, the namesake of a scholarship, a reason why certain security measures exist. Few have personal connections to the case, yet its impact shapes their daily experiences through subtle but persistent ways. "We all know the story," explains Hana Takahashi, a current student. "Not all the details, but enough to understand why our resident advisors insist on knowing our schedules, why there are so many emergency phones along campus paths, why we get free ride vouchers for night transportation. Miyako is why we take these things seriously instead of seeing them as overprotection." This practical legacy, improved safety measures, increased awareness, institutional policies prioritizing student protection, represents the constructive response to tragedy. While nothing can undo what happened to Miyako Hiraoka on October 26, 2009, these changes may have prevented similar fates for others. Mount Garyu still rises over Hamada, still gathers autumn mist around its shoulders, still draws hikers to its trails and mushroom collectors to its hidden clearings. Children still attend school beneath its shadow. Seasons still change across its slopes. Life continues in its presence. Yet something has permanently altered in the relationship between the mountain and the community it overlooks. Where once it represented merely geographical features, it now embodies something more complex. The knowledge that ordinary places can become extraordinary through single moments of human decision. Miyako chose to walk home alone to save 300 yen. Yano chose to transform private fantasy into devastating action. These individual choices rippled outward to affect an entire community, to change a mountain's meaning, to ensure that certain paths through certain forests will never again be walked without remembrance. As twilight falls across Mount Garyu on autumn evenings, some say the mountain keeps its own counsel. Others insist it speaks, if one knows how to listen, not with supernatural voices, but through the simple persistence of memory in landscape. The mountain remembers what happened on its slopes. And so does Hamada. And in that remembrance lives both caution and resilience, the knowledge that darkness exists alongside light, that safety requires vigilance, that communities survive even their deepest wounds. If you found value in this exploration of true crime and its lasting impact, please consider subscribing to our channel. Your support enables us to continue investigating cases that deserve to be remembered. And share in the comments, what unsolved case in your community still haunts residents years later? The shadows of Mount Garyu grow longer with each passing year, but the darkness they cast over Hamada remains. Miyako Hiraoka's story isn't just a tragedy. It's a glimpse into the abyss that exists beneath the veneer of ordinary life, a reminder that monsters walk among us wearing human faces. We comfort ourselves with the knowledge that Yoshihara Yano paid for his crimes, but the truth is more unsettling. How many others like him exist, their vicious fantasies concealed behind polite smiles and mundane routines? How many predators calculate the perfect moment to strike, watching from the periphery of our lives, patient and meticulous in their planning? The digital fragments that exposed Yano's depravity 7 years after Miyako's death serve as a chilling testament to how the dead can speak, how technology preserves both our memories and our nightmares. Those 57 photographs, locked away in evidence storage, contain horrors that investigators still cannot speak of without trembling. Perhaps most disturbing is not what we discovered about Miyako's final hours, but what we'll never know. How many others might have met similar fates had Yano's car not plunged into the sea? How many missing persons cases remain unsolved because their killers continue to walk free, their workshops clean, their tools ready? In the silence of night, when the wind moves through the trees on Mount Garyu, locals swear they hear whispers. Not just Miyako's voice asking, "Why me?" but the collective murmur of all victims who vanished without witnesses, whose remains may never be found, whose killers may never face justice. If this darkness resonates with you, if you believe these stories must be told no matter how disturbing, then join our channel. Subscribe now and become part of our community dedicated to staring unflinchingly into humanity's darkest corners. We don't sensationalize, we illuminate. Leave a comment below sharing which aspect of this case haunts you most deeply. Is it the calculated precision of the killer? The years of silence before evidence emerged? Or the terrifying reality that someone so monstrous could seem so normal to everyone around him? Remember, the difference between safety and tragedy is often just 300 yen, a moment's decision, a path walked alone in darkness. The monsters are watching. Are you?